Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, feels odd to include that, and I suppose I'm going to have to edit the stinger for the show. How has everything been going in the first week of the existence of the Substack?
It's incredible. I didn't expect this many people to sign up. That rules. I don't know. It's like kind of terrifying, kind of rad. I keep like my own schedule, and I didn't overcommit when I told people what I would do. And so it doesn't feel like I wake up like hurried. It doesn't feel like I'm going to miss a meeting. It's been going well. I've already written like one kind of deep dive into the Vikings, one like crazy long form piece that's like kind of relevant to stuff related to football. And then, just a couple of quick stingers here and there. I had like my quick preseason thoughts and stuff like that. It's really fun to kind of be self-directed in a way that's satisfying. I don't know. It's been great.
And I do also have to ask, is your car okay? Did your car situation find its way to be resolved?
No. So
listeners from last episode, if you missed this, check out the last 26 minutes of it. I promise it is absolutely worth it.
So I get a text. God, was it? It was yesterday morning, right? I get a text in the morning. It's just like, "Hey, Arif, this is so and so, your insurance adjuster. We contacted your tow yard, and they don't have a record of your car." It's like, what? What what do you mean they don't like? Surely, like they know that they had at once had it, yes. Right? And she's like, and she's like, well, they don't have a record of it. Can you confirm that it's the right tow lot? And I was like, okay, there's one in Minneapolis that's like publicly owned, right? The rest are private. And I was like physically there, right? So like I know the address and I know what it's called. Like, yeah, I can confirm all of this. So I go, I have to like call the tow lot. This is nuts. So what happened apparently? First of all, I called 311 because I was like, maybe I'll have better luck calling 311 because they actually pick up the phone. Because I've twice now called the impound lot and they just don't pick up the phone. They just don't. I've been on hold for like combined 3 hours over 2 phone calls. They just didn't pick up the phone.
This is what happens after you make it public that the police stole your car.
Yeah, right. This is retribution. And so like I'm just like, maybe I can just dial 311 and maybe I can just get it resolved on their end. I know this isn't going to work, but I try anyway. So I call 311. I'm like, hey, look, I know you have no control over this, and I'm sorry that you're the one that has to pick up my phone call, but the impound lot just isn't picking up. I just want to know if there's anything you can do in the system to let them know that they have my car. and they're like, yeah, we can check if they have it. And I was like, I know how that's going to go, but yeah, go ahead. And they checked and they don't have it according to the records. And I was like, yeah, that's wrong. I looked at it. I was there. I never got rid of it. It's undrivable. That's the reason it's there. So they were like, yeah, you're going to have to call the tow lot. And I was like, okay, the reason I called you instead of the tow lot is because they just don't pick up the phone. The last time I was transferred to them, I was told there was a 0-minute wait time. There's no wait time. And I was on the phone for 2 hours, which I would suggest belies the notion that they had no wait time. And they're like, okay, that's nice. Transferring you now. And I was like, oh, cool. Great. 40 minutes later, I get on the phone and I'm just like, hey, so what happened? Like, you have my car. And they're like, well, that's interesting. We don't have a record of it. And I was like, no, that I also brought that up. I am familiar with that fact.
Don't gaslight me. I went into my own car.
Yeah, I grabbed stuff from it. It's there. And I was like, okay, so here's what I suspect happened. And they're like, lay it on me. And I was like, oh God. I think that after I paid the tow fee, you all just deleted the car from the system to indicate that I had paid it, and didn't register that the car still needed to be there, even though that is like a fairly common occurrence for people paying their tow fee. And she was like, yeah, that probably happened. What's their license plate number? And I was like, well, oh, okay, great. Yeah, sure.
Oh, you had to come up with a solution. Like this was some sort of a puzzle.
Yeah, I was like, what?
None shall pass. Maybe this happened.
Dungeons and Dragons, man.
Yeah.
Evil dungeon masters just like, you must answer these riddles 3. It's like, give me my car. So yeah. So I had to tell the insurance, like, no, it turns out I did actually have the right impound lot. They just didn't have the car in it. So yeah. So we'll see. At some point, the insurance will drag it to a repair shop, and then it's going to sit in the repair shop for an ungodly amount of time while an insurance adjuster goes out to look at the car. And then the insurance adjuster is going to make an agonizing decision between whether or not it makes sense to repair the car or to just cut me a check for a totaled car. I don't know which one I want. And then we'll figure it out from there. That's cool. Yeah.
I like how the twist in all of this is I've never actually seen the car in person. I actually don't know if the car exists, quite frankly. So there's all bets are off at this point.
I now have records. I can forward them to you.
Well, yeah, from a place that said they didn't have your car.
I promise you it's registered with the state of Minnesota because I know what address it's registered to. Not this one.
Which is how you got into this problem to begin with. Okay. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. I had to include that at the beginning because it was such an important part of last episode. So
yeah, it's a follow-up. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. Welcome to this episode. We have a game to review against the Titans. It did not go well. The offense looks like hell, but it's second and third team, so whatever. But we also have a little bit of camp stuff to go over and some mailbag as well. But before we begin, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like access to stuff like bonus material, over to the Discord, all of that, you can get that over at patreon.com/norsecode. In a few days, we'll be posting our newest Patreon bonus episodes, so look out for that. A special thank you to the following awesome people over at Patreon. Jimothy Garrett, thank you so much. Andrew Schaefer, Evan, Eric Dahlberg, Andrew Mithen, apologies, Viking Doug, and of course, Aaron McMullen. Thank you so much for joining the Patreon. Again, Patreon gets all sorts of bonus stuff. All the cool kids are over there. Sure. Over at patreon.com/norsecode.
All the cool kids and also a number of extremely uncool kids. I will let you all sort amongst yourselves who is what.
Yes. You can join the revolution over at patreon.com/norsecode. Part of that's more true than others. And paypal.me/norsecode as well if you'd like to give a one-time donation. Otherwise, you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and we have some merch over there, including the 10-year anniversary shirt, which if you get it small enough, looks like Arif is wearing a baklava. That's worth it in and of itself. But check it out over at norsecode.threadless.com. Let's get into the episode itself and talk of... Oh, actually, no. We're not getting into the episode itself because we have to talk about one more thing, and that's the Hell League. The DMs for everyone on Twitter were changed, so you couldn't just send DMs without being verified to my account for some reason. So like everybody got that. So I've since fixed that. So now you can send a message. So this thing is going to be open until Sunday. Sunday at midnight is going to be the cutoff for the Hell League sign up. So at midnight, Saturday night, Sunday morning, on August 27th, that will be the cutoff to join the lottery for the Hell League. We've got some more people in after last episode, but there is still a spot for you over in the Hell League. There's a person who signed up who didn't know what the rules of the Hell League were. They just wanted to join because it sounded fun. I cackled.
Boy.
I cackled with laughter. You are going to enjoy this thoroughly. So you can email me at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com if it still gives you issues over on Twitter or X or whatever, or you can DM me on Twitter and I can sign you up that way. But that is open. That should be fixed from now on. because this world is stupid, or at least the person who runs it is. The app, anyway. So let's get into the episode itself.
Oh, actually, we're right before we get into the
No,
episode.
no.
One thing. People who have previously been patrons that are on the Patreon emailing list, so I added you all to an email list, and all of them have been given a month of the Wide Left Post Substack membership complimentary. I figured because you were already existing patrons, you didn't have a choice between if you could only, choose your money one way or the other. So you all get a month complimentary. When that's up, obviously you do whatever you want. You can, if you want to extend it in advance, go into the settings and extend it in advance, or you can do it when the month is up. I believe it's like September. No, I don't know when I did it. September 15th. Just letting you all know that anybody who is on the Patreon email list when I created the Substack has a month of paid membership. I know some people were asking me like, hey, I didn't pay for it, but I have access to your paid articles. What's up with that? That's what's up with that.
All right, good. So let's get into the episode, and let's talk about a uninspiring performance by the Vikings offense against the Titans. This was not. Admittedly, I'm a little tired of watching Nick Mullins. I'm pining for the days of Kirk Cousins and checkdowns, but this was not. I can't say I was blown away by the offensive performance by this team this day on Saturday.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me that much. Because it's like, all backups against all backups. Not entirely. There was one starting defensive lineman on the Titans who made everyone very aware that he is a starting caliber player. But, it's backups against backups, so you can't really tell kind of what that means. Obviously, you'd want your backups to play better. The stuff that I was kind of most curious about, for the most part, I ended up walking away fairly happy. We did not end up with we didn't end up with any N'Keal Harry playtime. We didn't end up with a ton of stuff from the receivers. Obviously, Jalen Naylor didn't play. So those kind of questions you didn't get answered, which would have been nice. But hey, we saw a bunch of involvement with the tight ends. That was really nice. Personally, I thought both Dwayne McBride and Ty Chandler played really well at running back. I know their statistics were pretty mediocre. Now, I was reading a postgame recap that had suggested that the running backs played poorly, and that's just not the opinion I walk away with. I think that they both did pretty well given the blocking that was available to them. And so on plays that were blocked really well, they got a lot of yards. On plays that were blocked okay, they got more yards than you'd expect a backup running back. Plays that were blocked really poorly, they got stuffed in the backfield. Dwayne McBride also had a couple of short yardage runs, so that hurt his yards per carry. But whatever, I like that kind of stuff. The other stuff, whatever. If Jaron Hall gets sacked because the fourth string offensive tackle can't hold up against the second string edge rusher, whatever. That doesn't bother me too much. I thought we saw some really good performances from players like Sheldon Day, who I didn't expect to make the roster, may still not, but would be a pretty good practice squad stash if he continues to play at that kind of level. I really liked some of the defensive stuff that maybe not Ivan Pace's remarkably best game as opposed to the previous week, but I don't think it was entirely all bad. The concerns I have are about players like Lewis Cine. I think that even if you get rid of that, missed tackle, I thought that he was really inconsistent about his ability to, hit his landmarks and stuff like that. But if we continue to get good play from players like Josh Metellus, yeah, maybe that pick doesn't work out. But, the safety room seems like it's in a really good spot. So, yeah, the offense didn't play well in total, but Nick Mullins played a pretty good backup quarterback as opposed to play. So that doesn't bother me. He can't throw to the outside, so he's limited, right? There's just not, you don't want to throw to the sidelines. And so he can't ever really be a starter. I know the broadcast suggested that maybe that's a possibility for him. I don't think so. But, I think that you could do a lot worse than him at backup quarterback, and I think he demonstrated that. So that was nice. The running backs are fine. The offensive line, hopefully no one gets hurt. That's, basically you've got Blake Brandel, and that's it. Fedarian Lowe wasn't bad, right? Luke Braun said that Austin Schlottman actually played better upon film review. I didn't pay as much attention to him when I watched the game back, so I can't verify that. But my initial impression was that he played poorly. So I don't know. That's maybe something to hang your hat on. without Chris Reed healthy, it's kind of hard to like figure out kind of who the next backup guard is. But Oliudo is bad, so you know. But yeah, the offense, whatever. The receivers are not going to be the primary depth receivers because like Jalen Naylor was hurt. I guess Jalen Reagor just didn't have, his best game. So whatever. But I thought that people were a little bit too high on him coming out of the Seahawks game. So that didn't really shock me either. But yeah, the other than like the third stringers, like there's just not much to talk about. Like Christian Jackson had a really big opportunity to really have a big game, and he didn't, take full advantage of that opportunity. But Ben Sims at tight end played really well. That was kind of cool. Yeah, there's not much else to talk about. Aaron Dykes, kind of fun. He's probably not going to be on the roster or the practice squad, but if he plays like that in the next game, maybe he'll be on the practice squad. I don't know.
So realistically, looking at the players currently signed, how many wide receivers do you think we're going to end up with? Like, it seems like the wide receiver room is an interesting challenge to cut down.
Yeah, maybe. I think that you could very easily make the case for 6, and there's maybe 7 receivers that could all make an argument to be in that 6. Obviously, you've got kind of the 3 lockdown with Addison, Osborne, and Jefferson, and then Jalen Naylor is almost certainly a lock. So there's your 4th one. And so the question is like, hey, is it Brandon Powell? Is it Jalen Reagor? Is it Tristan Jackson? What's going to happen there? And I think it's more likely to be 5. I think it's probably just going to be Brandon Powell, and then you're going to get your special team stuff elsewhere. Powell obviously would then have to demonstrate that he is at least a decent enough punt returner for that to be the case, or they could see if Kenny Nwangwu can do it, but there's just not enough time to see if he can do it. So you're going to need some solution there. But I think you're most likely going to end up with a 5 receiver room, but I've seen a lot of people put together rosters with 6 receivers, and I don't think that that's like that surprising either.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to straddle that. It seems like it's going to straddle that line. Looking at the backup running back situation, I don't want to say it kind of mirrors the wide receiver situation, but it does seem like some tough decisions are going to end up having to be made.
Yeah, it's well, it kind of depends, right? Because if you don't know, what Kenny Nwangwu's kind of deal is, it's really tough to get a good read, right? So first you have to make a decision about who's going to be the second running back. And I think there's a pretty good argument that Ty Chandler is going to be that guy. So after that, you have to make a decision about whether or not Kenny Nwangwu, who is played as the second running back when healthy in camp and in spring practices, is somebody that you can trust to be there. I don't see him as like a really high-end second running back. And so I think if he's on the roster, he's primarily a kick returner, and I don't think you have a lot of options there. So I think he probably makes the roster, and then you have to figure out if Dwayne McBride, has that, or whether or not you want somebody like Abram Smith or Aaron Dykes or whatever, right? And you could roll with 3 running backs with Madison, but like, I think you're just more likely to have 4. Dwayne McBride is a 7th round pick. The first game against Seattle just wasn't that good. So there's a good argument to like maybe cut him and stash him on the practice squad. You're probably not going to go through 4 backs in a game, and so you don't need him active. But yeah, I mean, that is kind of an inflection point there. Obviously, you're going to have a 4th or 5th one in CJ Ham. But yeah, that's going to be kind of a difficult one to fully figure out. But it does help McBride's case that, he had a pretty good game.
Obviously, you'd mentioned earlier the play of Lewis Cine is one of the bigger topics coming out of the game. And he had the one touchdown in particular that you could blame on him as far as like the missed tackle. And then he was a part of all those chestnut runs that seemed to go for much further than they should have if he would have just been able to wrap up. What are we able to glean from the play of him so far this preseason?
Well, if it was just like one thing, and I tweeted out that he's maybe the most baffling non-starter on the roster. If it was just like one thing that he was like consistently bad at, it would be easy to kind of diagnose like, hey, he's a safety. He needs to trigger quickly. That's part of the job description. If he can't do that, he can't, start or even be a backup. And that would be, fine. But the problem is that it's a really inconsistent skill of his. I mentioned last year, right, on this podcast, that he had some issues kind of trusting what he sees. He seems to see the right thing and he doesn't trust what he sees. And that might be what's happening here, because there were some plays even as a rookie that he made in camp where it was just like, oh, he trusted his eyes immediately, he acted on it, and he got a pick, which happened again this year in camp as well, where it was like a pick in the flat. He came from really high up and he just kind of knew where the ball was going to go and he took it. And there were some instances here early in the game. He had a really great tackle that was exactly that, coming from, I think he was a cover 2 type look or a too high look, and he was the near safety, and he crashed down on the flat. Did a really great job wrapping up the tackle. I think it was a tackle for loss. He had that. He had the sack of Malik Willis, where he played pretty decent contain on a Willis scramble that I thought, that's really good too. And a lot of that is just he's playing to his instincts. But sometimes he's just really, really slow to react, whether that is, missing his assignment in man coverage or being late to trigger or not realizing kind of the direction the ball is going in or getting baited by quarterback eyes or whatever, right? Like there's just all kinds of stuff where maybe he sees it. I can't obviously know for sure, but he's certainly not acting on it very quickly. And so if he just kind of develops that, then he's probably 90% of the way there. Like I know the missed tackles are like really bothersome, especially against the Seahawks. I know they're really bothersome. And I know that like when you see a missed tackle, it's more frustrating than not seeing the player at all. But missed tackles are valuable, right? Like if you make contact and you slow the player down, you might not make the tackle, but your teammates will, right? Obviously, it's better to make the tackle. And obviously, if you're a safety, sometimes your teammates are just not close enough to take advantage of that. So you do have to wrap up. I'm not saying that wrapping up is like overrated or anything like that, but it's not the end of the world if he's not always wrapping up his tackles. That is something he should improve upon to get better as a player overall. But to me, the primary issue is not his tackling form. That is a issue. The primary issue is how consistently he reacts quickly to the player, diagnoses or triggers or however you want to put it. O'Connell said after the game that he really appreciated that Cine was trusting his eyes more and triggering really quickly, and that's what they wanted out of him. I think that he did that in the game, but I think that it wasn't consistent. And so until that happens, it's just start Cameron Bynum, which is fine. I think Cameron Bynum's a fine safety. I think it was weird that a bunch of people like yesterday were talking about how bad he was as a safety. He's not bad. He's fine.
I guess one of the like bright shining moments of the game was the fact that the Vikings were able to get some pressure at least on quarterback for a good portion of the game anyway.
Yeah, and they got pressure from a bunch of different places. They got pressure from Benton Whitley, who got like a ton of pressures, honestly, from Luigi Villain. Sheldon Day, I already mentioned, had a really great game. So he was probably the Vikings pressure leader in terms of what he was doing. And then he also did a great job in the run game, which is pretty rare. But yeah, I mean, what Malik Willis was under pressure on almost 40% of his snaps. And some of that came on blitzes, like Ivan Pace, for example, had a pair of pass rushes and he got a pressure on one of them. I think was it Lewis Cine? I think they had a safety blitz that helped produce pressure, even though the safety himself didn't get pressure. They ended up with like a pressure from the nose position, which that might have been Sheldon Day, but I know that they were able to get some interior pressure, which I didn't necessarily expect. But yeah, they were able to generally put pressure on Malik Willis without necessarily blitzing as often as they did throughout camp. So that was nice.
Well, there's not much more we can talk about other than the fact that Greg Joseph is hitting field goals, which was necessary in this game. He's looking fine out there.
Yeah, smooth sailing from here on out. The Vikings kicking game.
Can we get that burned into wood or something? We're just going to name the episode Smooth Sailing and just always refer to this episode. It'll be great. Be fantastic. Well, let's wrap up this particular game because there is another game that I feel like we should talk about as far as the preseason is concerned. The Ravens streak is broken. And
oh my God. It was so funny because the first time I'd heard about the streak was right before the game.
Yeah, it was like, really? I'd heard about it last year. And last year there was a close call. But the Reds. Wow.
Oof.
That the Washington football team Commanders, which I prefer. I feel like you might as well just include all at once.
The whole,
frankly.
yeah.
It's like a Tribe Called Quest. You got to say the whole thing. So the Washington football team Commanders looked like they had just like walked off at the World Series from how that ended.
That ruled how much they celebrated ending the streak. And like before the game, like one of their tackles was like, "Oh yeah, that streak's going down." Like he cared about it.
Oh yeah,
and that was fun. Yeah, I know. Like one account like tweeted out like a video of them celebrating ending the streak, and we're like, "This is embarrassing." And like every account I follow on Twitter was just like dunking on this guy, and I was like, "Yeah, this guy's probably having a bad time right now." But it is correct to dunk.
Yeah,
let them have fun, man. What else? It's the preseason. There's like not much to play for. Let him have fun. This guy might get cut tomorrow.
Yeah,
right? Like,
dunk on him from the height of Mount Olympus. Like this is absolutely a thing. You should enjoy this. The only way it could have been better is if they're actually like if the Hard Knocks people was focused on Washington.
Yeah.
Boy, that would have been something.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah. So if the only way that could have been better, because you can imagine like the NFL Films like soundtrack in the background to that would have been glorious.
That would have been incredible.
Yeah. So
with Liev Schreiber, like
yes.
just narrating, the Ravens haven't lost a preseason game in over 7 years.
Like the bait with the marching band behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And like the fog machine of the walk-in is playing, and Lamar Jackson rushes out even though he's not going to play in the game. Like that would have been
Lamar
amazing.
Jackson watches from the sideline, helpless, as he's unable to provide the steps they need to keep the streak alive. It'll be perfect.
Yeah. Oh God.
That's exactly what this world needs, and less of me making the sounds of a band. Well, let's go to camp. A couple of updates as far as training camp is concerned.
Yeah. So obviously we had the joint practices, and that's kind of where the bulk of the updates were. Remember, practice earlier in the week was either at walkthrough speed or had been canceled because of weather. So mostly we just have the joint practices to work off of. There were like a couple of injuries to be concerned about. Like Lewis Cine, for example, small injury, returned. But we still haven't seen the return of Brian Asamoah. We haven't seen Kenny Nwangwu. We haven't seen Jalen Naylor, although it sounds like he's going to get back sooner rather than later. But yeah, those are kind of the concerns from an injury perspective. But in terms of performance, that's when we got to see the first team offensive defensive units actually go up against like our first team offensive defensive unit of their own. And for the most part, you take a look at kind of what everybody's been saying, Alec Lewis, Matthew Collar, they've talked about how the Vikings pass protection has surprisingly held up. I mean, I know that there's that viral tweet of Taylor Tart just kind of destroying Garrett Bradbury in a one-on-one drill. And I do find a lot of value in one-on-one drills. But the fact that John Sullivan responded to it with like, no, this is a one-on-one. It doesn't mean that much. You can't try. And like, fine, I get it. Like, you're mostly right. But also you were an undersized center. Like you got pretty demolished sometimes in one-on-ones. So like, I feel like there's something here. But yeah, I mean, like it was not representative of how the Vikings performed, against the Titans throughout. So the pass protection was a lot better than people thought. And Cousins was relatively efficient. So that was nice. We saw some good plays from players like Jordan Addison, of course. And, Justin Jefferson was like putting people in a blender. All really great stuff. I don't know that we got much of an indication if the run game is going to be where we kind of hope it is. It's a huge advance from last year is kind of the expectation. And I don't know that we've got one indication one with the other. I know on the other side of the ball that the Vikings did a pretty good job for the most part managing the Titans run game with Derrick Henry. Again, without tackling, it's like Derrick Henry's thing is breaking tackle. So like without tackling, you don't really get a great opportunity to get an understanding of it. But hey, people in the right places pretty consistently, that's a really great place to start. So There's that. Caleb Evans, from my understanding, played pretty well. It's not as if the Titans have like world beaters at receiver. Like I know, of course, DeAndre Hopkins, but like it's not AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, right? Like that's which I think is what week 2. So like keep that in mind. But Caleb Evans looked good. Byron Murphy, clearly the best corner on the roster, looked good. Alec talked to like Joanne Williams and a couple of other people in the defensive back rooms about Mekhi Blackman or Mekhi. I'm getting confused because of Mekhi Becton, right? Mekhi Blackman, and how comfortable he is in the defense. Remember, he wasn't on the first team for the beginning of camp. Joanne Williams was, and then he rotated in. Byron Murphy plays on the outside in that situation, and he's looked pretty good since then. And apparently against the Titans, more of that, lining up against Kyle Phillips, really great route runner from UCLA from last year, or UCLA 2 years ago, draft pick from last year. That's like a good, person to be able to lock up, right? Maybe not like Cooper Kupp from the slot, but like, pretty good person to lock up. For the most part, the impressions that I'm getting from camp are pretty positive, despite some of the big highlights that you see from camp being characterized largely as negatives. And I think we're getting more from the camp stuff than we are from the preseason because we're able to see those starters. Like, for example, we saw the Titans were pressured constantly by the Vikings. And I think a lot of that comes from, the blitz heavy stuff, but also we're seeing Davenport actually do some of the stuff that we're hoping he might be able to do. It's a gamble that the Vikings signed him. He's coming off of a down year, both in terms of win rate and sack rate. And you signed to, I wouldn't say, it's not a team friendly contract or anything like that, I guess is the best way to put it, but it's not like an overbearing contract because it's only 1 year. But, he's taken up cap space in a pretty significant way. And now he's got to take on this role of being, it put into the Zadarius Smith kind of situation. Like Zadarius Smith rushes from the inside to the outside, and so does Marcus Davenport. And that's probably the end of the comparisons between the two. How they rush from the inside is a little bit different. Davenport's lined up like as a tackle, and Zadarius Smith is just kind of walking around. So it's a lot different, but you're seeing a little bit, and he's actually performing, at least in camp, which is really nice to see. Hunter's playing really well. The blitz packages are lining up. Josh Metellus was able to get some pressure as a blitzer. Harrison Smith, so like the pressure production element from the Vikings seems to be good. So it's mostly positive from what we're seeing from Titans camp. I am concerned about, Brian Asamoah and what's going to happen to that linebacker role. The way some people are talking about this, I'm actually really surprised, is that some people are talking about it as if Ivan Pace has already taken Brian Asamoah's job. And I just don't see that. Like, it's just like not in my realm of likelihoods right now. Like that would very much surprise me. But I should note, it wouldn't surprise a bunch of other people. I really just do think the Asamoah is just injured. And so he's just not seeing the field. So I don't think Ivan Pace is doing enough to overtake him. And he made some mental errors in this game against the Titans that would probably continue to keep him off the field, at least in the short run. Like, he does need to be corrected by other members of the defense from time to time. And while that is something that, like, long term probably doesn't indicate any problems or anything like that, he's probably going to be a really interesting player. Short term, it means he probably shouldn't be a starter. So I don't think that there's the possibility that he could beat out Asamoah for a job. And also, like if he would be beating out anybody, it'd be Jordan Hicks, I would think. We don't know how good Asamoah is, but like we know how good Hicks isn't. Like, there's an opportunity there. So I don't know. But yeah, and also the starting kind of distinction may not matter that much because there seems to be a lot of personnel rotation. We saw a lot of dime in camp. We saw a lot of dime defense in the preseason. And for people who are unfamiliar, dime defense is when you have, instead of 4 or instead of 5, 6 defensive backs on the field at once. Those 6 defensive backs are paired with usually 4 people on the line of scrimmage. You can call them the defensive linemen. 2 of them will be outside linebackers, but they're defensive linemen. And then 1 off-ball linebacker. And in the game, very often, that was Ivan Pace. In camp, in the first team was Jordan Hicks, but I suspect in a game with Asamoah healthy, it'd be him. So that's mostly what I'm getting from camp. I'm getting also that the Vikings tight end room is pretty spectacular. So that's cool. but um, you know, it's camp, so everything with a grain of salt.
It'd just be nice if that would be one thing to be taken care of. Like, oh, well, good.
Yeah.
As it turns out, we will take that.
Yeah, just throwing resources at the tight end problem actually does work when you don't sign John Carlson.
Wow, I had forgotten about that. Thank you. That was
No problem.
a lovely moment that you just gave me. Great. Well, while I gargle bleach, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from Jack, who asks, with an ownership group seemingly averse to blowing it up, we find our Vikings well into a competitive rebuild. That said, there are some seemingly glaring issues with our roster, with a lot of faith put into players who might not be able to fill said holes. Going back to the original statement, does our ownership's desire for the competitive rebuild put our front office at a disadvantage, or would these holes still be difficult with the clean slate?
So I think whenever you put limitations on what an organization can do, that makes it more difficult for the organization to accomplish their goals. So from a like objective standard, yes, obviously the competitive rebuild mandate narrows the range of options available to the Vikings. That makes it difficult for them. I don't know that the way it seems like the Vikings have set themselves up for some flexibility in 2024. They've got a ton of free agents hitting, free agency, right? The contracts are expiring before 2024, and you're going to get some dead cap hits from Kirk Cousins and from Marcus Davenport and some other players. Like, that's just going to be part of the problem there. But there is a fair amount of roster flexibility in 2024, both from a cap perspective and in terms of like what are problems and what are not problems. So if, for example, you come out of the season thinking, wow, Marcus Davenport like really demonstrated that he could be maybe even a high level starter, right? He was just having a down year in New Orleans. He needed to, watch his conditioning. He needed to kind of be in a new environment, and he's playing really well. You got that Daniel Hunter. Well, now the edge rusher is not a problem. You just have to extend Davenport, right? And you've got some opportunity to do that. I think we're not going to really get a good understanding of how successful this competitive rebuild could be until we see what the extensions for TJ Hawkinson and Justin Jefferson look like, assuming, of course, that there are extensions. I mean, some people have already begun floating the idea that the reason TJ Hawkinson has been absent from practice, in addition to the ear infection, is that maybe he's kind of slowing his return to practice because of the contract dispute that he and the Vikings may have. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I can't really. It was funny because like they asked Hawkinson and they're like, "Hey, does this have anything to do with your contract status?" And he goes, "I don't know." Which that's like you could just say you have an ear infection, right? Like I don't know is a really weird answer to that. So that could be it. If they don't get those extensions resolved, then the flexibility kind of doesn't matter, and they basically have to tank no matter what. But if they do kind of get some of the core players that they want to extended, they can create a fairly favorable cap situation for 2024, so long as you recognize that the Kirk Cousins like cap hit is going to really make your options difficult. But yeah, the ownership took aggressive paring down of the roster and tanking and whatever you want to call it off the table. And that makes it difficult for them to come back in like 3 years with a Super Bowl ready team. They need to consistently be competitive. That means making really difficult choices. They still were able to move on from Adam Thielen and Eric Hendricks, right? That's, those moves made sense. They still were comfortable, I guess, trading Zadarius Smith. They let Dalvin Tomlinson walk in free agency. Like they let some of these veterans like leave, right? So it's not as if the competitive rebuild is also a mandate that they, keep the same players that were on their roster last year. So it's not like as restrictive as it might sound, but it is restrictive.
Well, next question is going to be from Rob Lavender, who asks, Kirk has been throwing into more tight coverage, or so it appears, in some of these videos from team practices, and trusting his wide receivers to make the catch. Do you think he will carry this into the season and take a few more risks? Seems he has been a bit conservative in the past.
Not going to comment on the double meaning of that one, but no, that's not really a good way to characterize his level of play. He seems like a conservative player because he's very by the book, by the numbers. But I don't actually think that how he interprets the answers to the book, right? Like what he determines to be open based on the progression is a little bit closer to risky than like say an Alex Smith or Teddy Bridgewater. He's not, Jimmy Garoppoloing his way down the field. Like he throws the ball deep with some regularity. His tight window throw rate compared to quarterbacks across the league, I think all 3 years, the last 3 years, have been basically dead on league average, right? So I wouldn't necessarily call his style of play all that conservative. It's just not explosive. It's not, stuff that makes you think that you're always going to be in a game even when you only have 13 seconds left, right? But I wouldn't say, that he refuses to challenge tight windows. I wouldn't say that he turns down the deep ball with any regularity. He does that. He does both of those things. And he did it more last year in response to the changing situation, which is a constant kind of problem that he had in his past. It's a criticism I've had of him, and he didn't really do that last year, which is great. But it's possible that we see a more aggressive Cousins. Remember that when Thielen and Diggs were on the roster, like 2019, and they were both playing really well, like they won a lot of contested catches. And that only happens if your quarterback's willing to throw those contested catches. Like there were a lot of really aggressive sideline throws that the two of them reeled in. So I would say that like he's probably average in terms of how risk friendly versus risk averse that he is. And that might change. He might be a little bit more willing to take on some risk with his throws. But like, I think for the most part, we should think of him more as an NFL average type player in that regard.
And the stats really like force you to look at it like that, but the stats really like back that up.
Yeah, they really strongly suggest it. Like the one stat that maybe tells you that he's a little bit risk averse is that his long time to throw would suggest he waits for receivers to get open. But I don't actually think that's it as much. The rest of the statistics that might give you some indication about how aggressive this player is tell us that almost entirely across the board that Cousins is fairly average across the NFL, at least in terms of aggression, right? Like he's got a pretty good arm. I think that if you took his arm strength and compared it to quarterbacks in 2015, you'd say it's an above average or even a strong arm. Now in like the 2023 environment, it probably isn't. There's just so many strong arm quarterbacks that have earned starting jobs but his arm strength hasn't changed. It's much more than adequate. I mean, it's way better than Nick Mullins, right? It's much more than adequate. It's much better than Jimmy Garoppolo's, right? But, when you have moderate aggression and great arm strength, that looks a lot better than moderate aggression and like pretty good arm strength. So like, yeah, all of the stuff that we have statistically to tell us how conservative a quarterback might be, they tell us that Cousins is not overly conservative like a Jimmy Garoppolo.
Next question is from Damian Barrett, who asks, what is the point of preseason games? In general, but specifically for the Vikings. Do the benefit of these games outweigh what could be achieved on a practice field? It seems teams are too conservative with starters and plays to gain any meaningful insights for the season ahead. Do supporters enjoy attending these games? Do the owners even gain anything commercially from staging games in quarter-full stadiums? If I can answer part of that, I went to last year's abomination of the Denver game. The one where Denver just like ran up the score in the preseason. And it was Teddy's homecoming game. So it was the tickets being like ridiculously cheap, like encourages people who normally wouldn't go to a game to go, hey, I'll spend $5-10 for this. This will be fine. Like, it's obviously not a full game. You're not getting the starters playing or anything, but it was an experience to be inside of US Bank Stadium for a game for remarkably cheap. So there is that aspect of it.
Yeah, and it's fun. You just have to remember that you are not obligated to be there for the full game. And that actually, knowing that actually is very liberating because you show up, you have a lot of fun, and you're like, I'm done. Third quarter, I'm good. And you just leave. It doesn't matter. You can go. And then you can maximize your enjoyment of the game. So I think there's that. But like in terms of like the point of the preseason is that it operates as a good way to like ramp up. And I'll just talk about it from the player perspective. There's like a really interesting coaching point that's worth addressing in a second. But just in terms of like in the practice environment, like you could, in theory, tackle in practice and learn all these things. But the problem is, one, the CBA, but two, that like you're not going to get the same type of player opponent interaction in a practice where it just doesn't feel like there are stakes than you are in a preseason game, even though you know there aren't stakes. Because I think that you're going to get more reps that replicate game situations that allow you a better evaluation environment for those players. And because those are essentially at full speed. Now, mind you, backups against backups, they just don't operate as quickly as starters against starters, but they allow you to understand like, okay, this player is doing really well in meeting rooms. He's great on the whiteboard or whatever you want to call it, right? He's doing well in meeting rooms, great on the whiteboard. Whenever I stop him in a hallway and quiz him, he's nailing it. In practice, he's calling out all the keys. That's not happening at full speed. I need to know if you can do that at full speed. And sometimes they can't. Sometimes you do it really well in practice. Sometimes you're doing it really well on the whiteboard. And then at game speed, it's just everything's too fast, right? So it acclimates players in ways that practices don't. That's really important. And it allows you to have those reps in a field environment that I think it just adds additional value. On top of that, like they do charge for the games and they do, from my understanding, make a profit from those games. It's not that important to them. If they can get rid of a preseason game and add a regular season game, they will, because they did. We know that. So there's that, but they do generate a profit on these games. And they also, and this kind of sucks for season ticket holders, technically charge you for the preseason tickets if you get season tickets. Now, personally, I think it just looks like they charge you, and they would charge you the same or just very slightly less than what it looks like. If you separated them out, right? If you could get season tickets without the preseason games and you bought that, it would be lower. The difference in price would not be significant or match the bill that they give you for how much they're charging you for a preseason game. But technically you are paying for the preseason games with your season tickets. There's all that. The coaching point I think is really interesting because coaches will experiment a lot with their own coaches during the preseason. And we have seen, especially now in the past couple of years, head coaches give their younger coaches play calling opportunities, right? So Kevin O'Connell did that with Wes Phillips in this game, where Wes Phillips was able to call a lot of plays. I don't think he called the entire game, but Wes Phillips called a number of plays. Cool. And then also we've seen it across the league. I think Mike Vrabel actually also did the same thing on the other side of the ball with, I want to say it's like a wide receivers coach or something. And there was a discussion that Mike Vrabel had about providing opportunities for coaches that typically don't have opportunities, coaches who, might be black, right? That they just don't, historically, black coaches just don't get as many opportunities, right? Or because they're a wide receivers coach, right? Just don't get opportunities. That's just not a thing that's available to you as often, right? So that's really cool. What's also important to remember is that this is also a really great time to test your ability to do in-game management as a coach, timeouts, challenges, etc. Right? So like you need to get your play operation in place. So you need to make sure you've got all the right number of players on the field. If you don't, you need to call a timeout. That kind of stuff. Like all of that mechanically works out. You notice that the Vikings played one play or almost played a play with 10 players on the field on defense. That's what the preseason is for, is kind of knocking that rust off. But also, like the Vikings were calling additional timeouts late in the game to see if they could get a 2-minute drive from Jaron Hall. They didn't, but that was the idea. And so even though your goals are maybe a little bit different because they weren't doing it to try and maximize their chances of winning, although in this case, those goals did specifically align in that one instance. They were trying to find ways to see how does Jaron Hall operate in a 2-minute drill. So they were using their game management tools and knowledge to see if they could manufacture that. They didn't, but they do practice their game management in the preseason. So there's like a lot of stuff that you get done. It's like a dress rehearsal for a wedding, right? Like what's the point of a dress rehearsal besides, the food's pretty worth it, but what's the point of the dress rehearsal? It's so you don't screw up on your wedding day. Maybe that point is overemphasized. Like maybe you're not going to screw up as much as you think, but you should do it because you're probably going to screw up a little bit if you don't.
And the food again is usually worth it.
Yeah.
If the groom's dinner, yes, that's typically what it's referred to as. I suppose I have more experience in this than you do on my.
The wedding parties I've been a part of have been closer to shotgun weddings than they have been, well planned affairs. I'll say that.
mine was well, yeah, mine both managed to be well planned and an affair. So yeah, let's go with that.
That's right.
So let's go to the next question.
Real quick, I do want to interrupt. The time we were hanging out with Luke Braun here in Minneapolis.
Oh, that was so good.
And James would just tell a story, and he'd just drop a detail like that, and then James and I would move on, and Luke's eyes would just go wide, and he'd just get like whiplash. He's like, "Wait, what's that about? What's that about? What's that? What is this story about? What do you mean almost?" It's just great.
It was so good. And eventually we broke Luke Braun's spirit.
He just got overwhelmed. He's like, I'm never going to know anything.
I have to hang out with you guys a couple more times just so I can understand the lore of James's stories.
It's like when you bring a quarterback into a new system, you just don't know the language of the terminology yet. Like, yep. You get what a slant route is, but you don't know that Ghost refers to it, right? You get what a wife is, but you don't know what James means when he says wife.
That's not one of the more accurate things that's ever been said about me. All right, we're going to go to Ingram's Left Foot, who asks, for a Reefs editor corner, what's it like working as a Reefs editor after the first week on Substack, and how do you keep him on task?
So the physical act of editing my own articles, kind of annoying, but it is probably making me a better writer than just shipping it off to an editor and they correct it. And it's just not. It's really important to emphasize that in a lot of sports writing environments, there's not a lot of opportunity for you to get direct feedback on your writing from your editor. You can set up times to do that, but it always feels like there's always something else that you want to take care of first. And so the time that you're having a meeting to get feedback on the quality of your work or the things that you could do better, maybe you could better spend, compiling boards for your consensus big board. That's your biggest story of the year. You might as well do that, right? So it's tough to isolate a time to get editor feedback. And so while they were all better editors than I am of my own work, it was really difficult for me to kind of figure out why they would make some of the choices that they would make. And I'd have to schedule out time. And that was really tough. So from a pure editing standpoint, it is annoying, but I think it's helping me a little bit. But the other stuff, I don't schedule meetings with myself. I don't get really upset if I miss a 7:30 a.m. meeting with me, because I can always catch up on myself later. Whenever he's free, I'm free, right? It's not a big deal. It is kind of tough not to have someone kind of help you generate story ideas, but I have committed to not writing a ton. I want to write deeper, longer pieces less often than I want to write. Because at some points I was writing 2 pieces a day, both for the Athletic and Pro Football Network, and it makes it difficult for me to focus on the stuff that I think is my strength, which is these deep dives. So, what kinds of stories are deserving of a deep dive? I'm going to have to take some time to do that, right? So, there's a back and forth, but keeping me on task, always difficult for any of my editors, but easier for me because I'm assigning me my work. So it's stuff I'm genuinely excited about, and not hey, can you knock out this piece on the top 10 defenses in the playoffs or whatever? And it's I don't dislike the piece, but I'm not passionate about it either, right? I'm just all right, well, let's talk about Fred Wagner again, whatever. But let's talk about this guy again for the 40th time, or let's talk about how no one's talking about Talanoa Hufanga, right? The safety from San Francisco, Warner, that's the name I was looking for. I've done it a ton and I've said my piece and I kind of want to move on, and I'm still going to have pieces like that, right? This season, right? Where I'm just gonna be look, it's not, if people are subscribing to my work, they're probably going to want to know about the most important story this week. So I'm going to write about it, but I can spend more time doing the stuff that I'm really excited about doing because I'm not reliant on ad revenue or SEO. So yeah, it's easier to keep me on task because I've assigned myself the tasks.
I look forward to reading your article on the top 10 defenses of the playoffs this year. Just when you're bereft of ideas, like, God damn it, I'm gonna have to do this one.
There's only 14 defenses. I don't know why I said top 10.
Well, usually there's 4 you can usually like write off.
I should just write the bottom 4 defenses of the playoffs.
That actually could work out really well. There's an AI tool I need to show you after the episode that could help you with this. Ingram's Left Foot also asks, do you think any of the injured players have a significant risk of losing their depth place or even a roster spot?
Yeah, I think that is a risk for Chris Reed, who, if he'd been fully healthy throughout camp, probably the top interior backup lineman, depending on what Blake Brandel is during the season, right? Like if he's a tackle, then he's the top backup tackle, and they're just training him at guard over training camp because A, Chris Reed's not healthy, but B, they just don't have a ton of interior offensive line depth. And so if you can play 4 or even maybe 5 positions across the line, that's just an extraordinary, tool to have, an extraordinary resource to have available to you. But, the longer he's out, the more I'm kind of worried that they're just not going to feel committed to keeping him on the roster. And maybe he'll be healthy before cutdown day. And even then they might just be like, well, we'll put you on the practice squad. And if things are working out, we'll put you back on the roster proper. But like that one's kind of concerning to me. And then Kenny Nwangwu, I already talked about a little bit. Yeah, I think that because he's injured, he's not been able to demonstrate that he's learned a lot as a running back and deserves to be ahead of Ty Chandler, who I think has played really well in both preseason games and has been having a pretty good camp. And so I think that's a guy that's probably not going to lose his roster spot because he's a kick returner, but also probably better than Dwayne McBride right now. But might lose his spot on the depth chart as the primary backup to Alexander Madison. I am still skeptical about Brian Asamoah losing his spot. And also Jalen Naylor, I think we're all pretty comfortable saying he's the 4th receiver, so no worries there. But I just don't think that the linebacker depth chart is changing as much as with as much likelihood as people are projecting.
And finally, how does Jonathan Taylor compare to Nick Chubb? Knowing that Kwesi comes off the berry tree, does that give any possibility for a move, or is the team in the wrong phase of the rebuild for a market-setting running back?
I think that they probably wouldn't do it because of the running back thing. I think that their commitment to this running back by committee / invest in run blockers, not in runners sort of approach would prevent them from doing that. They wouldn't necessarily say no to Jonathan Taylor if he was a free agent and he was like, I'll work for veteran minimum, right? Like that's not the issue. The issue is the combination of a first round pick and the likely extension of a contract, right? Because I don't think he would agree to a trade without a contract extension in place. So I think both of those things combined, it's not the same thing as Dalvin Cook, right? Because Cook is coming off of a bad year. And technically Taylor, I guess you could say, is coming off of a down year. But I think everyone's reasonably certain that he's just a very good running back. So it's just a different situation. But I would argue that it is not likely that they're going to invest a ton of resources there. Now, it's good to bring up Nick Chubb because that is an organization not only that Kwesi comes from, but is analytically forward, right? And has invested resources into Nick Chubb, who, if you want to compare the two, it's almost a joke now that Nick Chubb is the best pure runner in the NFL. I mean, he is, right? But it's like fantasy analysts think it's kind of funny. People have repeated it a lot, but he is, right? And in some ways, it's almost damning by faint praise because it kind of suggests that he's not a very effective receiver. I think his receiving is probably a little bit underrated nationally, but it is not, a trump card by any reasonable stretch of the imagination. Jonathan Taylor is not as good a runner as Nick Chubb. He's faster, maybe not by as much as one might expect, but he's faster. But he's not as good of a runner as Chubb. The ability to kind of navigate those tight spaces, the quick footwork inside the hole, the ability to break tackles or run through people or make the decision about whether or not to run through people or find the open field or whatever, right? All of those running back tools that Chubb has, he's just a really astounding at it. And he brings more power, which is not to say Jonathan Taylor doesn't have a lot of power. He does. A lot of people were surprised that he ran a 4.3 whatever at the combine because he's such a big back and he played for Wisconsin, which is just kind of, you don't see those backs at Wisconsin. You see good backs, right? But you see they run 4.5 and they're giant. But he's got that, but he's just a very good receiver. He's not as good a receiver as Christian McCaffrey, he might be a better runner than McCaffrey. He's not as good a runner as Chubb, but he's almost certainly a better receiver, right? And so you've got this guy that has the ability to be kind of a true all-round back in a way that you don't tend to see very often. And I think in the right environment, could grow into having LaDainian Tomlinson type usages in certain offenses. Now, you didn't get that last year because it's a bad coaching environment, bad offense. The offensive line took a step back, and that's just tough, right? And I'm not saying he's as good as LaDainian, who's one of the best running backs of all time, but you see kind of that like LaDainian could do everything, right? I guess I don't know if Jonathan Taylor can throw touchdowns, and LaDainian definitely could, but from what do you expect of a running back? Yeah, LaDainian could do everything. Jonathan Taylor can do a lot of everything.
Next question is from Cody, who asks, for Arif's AI article corner, in your recent Substack post, you noted that Gannett's cost-cutting measures have sent them into a negative feedback loop, where poor quality creates losses and losses creates cuts, which hurts the quality. Do you think this has been the case for larger sports media companies like ESPN and The Athletic as well? Is this part of the reason why you left The Athletic last year?
So while I was not crazy about the direction The Athletic was taking, that actually had nothing to do with the reason I left The Athletic. The reason I left The Athletic is because Pro Football Network offered me a raise over what I was making, and more important, actually, offered me a role as a national writer. And The Athletic, while they were hiring national writers at the time, I mean, I would also hire Kalen Kaler ahead of me, right? That's what they're working with, right? So, like, I don't have an issue with the fact that they didn't give me a national job, but I had an opportunity to have a job covering the NFL nationally, which was a huge goal of mine. And for anybody who remembers the episode that we recorded after I'd been hired, I mean, that was the thing that I highlighted, is my ability to cover the NFL nationally. So that was primarily it, right? Like, yeah, I didn't love the direction The Athletic was going in, but I didn't there's some things I genuinely didn't love, but like, I wasn't so upset that I would like leave the company for it. Right. So that wasn't really it. The Athletic, people know that they've laid off a couple of writers pretty recently. In fact, Pro Football Network hired one of them, Jay Morrison, really great Bengals writer. I mean, in my opinion, he produces more than he costs. So I wouldn't, if I were The Athletic, I wouldn't have laid him off, but he's a really fantastic writer for the Bengals. They had two Bengals writers, and they kind of wanted to move in a direction where they only had really one writer per team. I don't. That's not a business decision I would make. But that you could see as potentially, hey, we're not making as much money as we want to. We have to cut costs. We have to do this. And the thing is, like, people have been reporting that The Athletic has been losing money for the entirety of its existence, right? And I don't think that that's really a fair way to characterize the way The Athletic operated then or operates now. Right now, The Athletic is a value add for subscribers for the New York Times, and also a way to funnel their current subscriber base into the New York Times. And so The Athletic has lowered the cost of a subscription. I forget what it is now, but for a long time it was like $1 a month. Has lowered the cost of a subscription in order to maximize that funnel so that people will, be maybe incentivized to be part of the New York Times total subscription package. So you cannot look at The Athletic in isolation anymore, look at the revenue versus costs and say that's it, right? You have to figure out kind of what are the compound effects of having this subscriber base available to you as the New York Times, right? I would also potentially suggest that there is maybe a relationship between acquiring The Athletic and letting go of their sports vertical at the New York Times. I would think that there is a relationship there. I can't say that with any definitive proof, and the New York Times has denied it, but it very much seems like that's the case, right? I have now been it's been such a long time since I've been at The Athletic, it's been a year, but that's, I think, long enough for me to say with some confidence, I don't know what's going on over there. And I don't mean that as like who knows what's going on? More like I literally just have no idea, right? So I can't say that that's what seems like it's what's happening. I can say, basically, just as an outside observer, that's what it looks like to me. And so if that's the case, then there are other ways you can look at cost benefit. And while I think the introduction of ads into The Athletic was a mistake, while I think the direction that the content has moved in is not a direction that I personally as a reader would love, and didn't necessarily love as a writer while I was there, I don't think that they're doing the same thing that I described in that article with Gannett, because Gannett is aggressively reducing the coverage capabilities of all of their newspapers and the quality of their coverage across the board. And while The Athletic has downsized and has pursued strategies that minimize the number of reporters they have, they are still employing really high value reporters in really high value positions. And they are still trying to make sure that there is quality. I think the processes they've implemented probably reduce the likelihood that you get as much quality out of those articles as you did maybe 4 years ago at The Athletic. That's my opinion. I don't know that for a fact. But it is not anything close to resembling what Gannett has been doing. There are newspapers local newspapers that have completely shut down their print operations and are now being run by one writer, the whole newspaper, one writer for like a whole county, one writer. And the editor, so there's no editor, the editor is remote. That is a level of bare bones that is nothing like The Athletic, nothing like The Athletic. So I wouldn't suggest that they're the same. I would say that The Athletic is engaging in cost-cutting measures. I do think those cost-cutting measures have reduced possibly the quality of the content, or at least the quality of the user experience if we're talking about ads, which is not technically a cost-cutting measure, but subsidizes your cost by bringing in revenue from a different source. But I would say that, yeah, they're reducing costs, and yeah, that comes at a cost of quality, but I don't think we've created a negative feedback loop there. I wouldn't, for example, suggest to anyone who has a subscription to The Athletic that they should reconsider. I wouldn't do that at all. I currently have a subscription to The Athletic, and I'm not considering letting go of it. I think that there is still a lot of high quality writing, and I think it's worth the subscription, and I don't think they're in a spiral of any kind. Gannett, I think, is in a spiral. So I think that those are very different things. ESPN, I would probably characterize as something very similar to The Athletic. I wouldn't say that they're in that same spot. I don't know that they know what to do with all their talent, and I do think that they are very much worried about their top-end talent being paid a lot more than they not anticipated, but a lot more than what the ledgers say is wise. And they've been very aggressive about it, but they've also invested a lot of money into different types of platforms. Like, yeah, they let off a bunch of people, and they hired Pat McAfee, and that looked pretty bad, right? Because it made it seem like they fired people to hire McAfee. And that's not really it. It's more, I don't think we're getting as much out of TV as we used to. I think we're going to get more out of online. That's more it. So I think that's just kind of, they might have less revenue to work with. I don't know. Actually, I would kind of doubt it, but I can't know. I think it's more shifting platforms, and the talent that you have right now is not the talent that'd be best for the platform that they want to shift to. So that's probably the direction I would go in. Because if they were really doing that, they would go back to the conference coverage model instead of the team coverage model, because they've got a reporter covering every team. They used to actually just have a reporter covering every division, right? They had, like, Kevin Seifert was the NFC North guy, right? Now they've got somebody on every team. And I think that they would probably, if that was really what they were doing, they go back to that, which sucked. I'm glad that they have, like, what do they call it? ESPN Nation. I'm glad they have that. I'm glad they have Insider. I'm glad they've got the high quality stuff that, like, Bill Barnwell or whoever produces. But I don't think that that's I think ESPN is trying to engage with the market in a new way. I think that's what's happening there.
Also from Cody, for Arif's quarterback three corner, I'm having a hard time getting a grasp on what the signing of Jordan Ta'amo, apologies, means. Do you think he's merely a camp arm, or do you think the Vikings see a potential long-term future with him? Is Jaren Hall in trouble?
I don't think Jaren Hall is in trouble, but I do think that it's kind of in between the two. I think that they're trying to determine the possibility that there's a long-term future with him. I think that they had a lot of quarterbacks that they could have signed, like Case Cookus, and they chose Jordan Ta'amu for a reason. He's got a bunch of really great spring league statistics. I thought he had a pretty solid college profile, honestly. And there is the potential that he could turn into a fairly high quality player to have in your roster. But I think they just don't know, right? I think they're just like, hey, there are all these indicators that this player could be valuable in some capacity, right? Not necessarily as a starter, but we can't really say that those probabilities have like a solid foundation to work off of. So we're going to bring him in camp. I think that this is more just, we've got exclusive access to you. We're going to teach you the playbook, see how you respond to that. We're going to have you throw in camp, see how you respond to that. If it works out, you get a practice squad spot. And if that works out, then it's going to be really interesting what's going to happen between you and Jaren Hall, because Jaren Hall is not a guarantee to develop into a backup quality quarterback. Neither is Jordan Ta'amu. But between the two of them, you might have some chance that at least one of them emerges to be that level of quality. And next year, maybe Hall is in trouble. I don't think it means anything this year. And I think it's more kind of an extended tryout for Ta'amu to make a practice squad.
Next question is from Logan Bolsharif, who asks, question for Arif's football corner. I was thinking about some of the recent second contract Vikings players that didn't last long afterwards or didn't play well. Rhodes, great, not long. Barr, Kendricks, great and long. And I am wondering, would it be better for NFL teams to attempt to trade good players before the end of their first contracts for draft capital and cap savings? Obviously, you wouldn't do that with a couple of positions, left tackle and quarterback and wide receiver, but it feels like with most, the likelihood of a player going through to a third contract is low.
No, I don't think that's... I think that... So your heuristic should be, like, baseline, you should generally expect players to peak around age 28. For receivers, I think it's like around 29 historically. I think for cornerbacks, it might be closer to 27, but it's like around age 28. Not true for running backs, which sucks. And obviously not true for quarterbacks, which for them super doesn't suck, right? But for the most part, that's kind of where a player peaks. And that's almost always in the second contract. And so it would be difficult. And I know that, obviously there's like a lot of cap stuff that you have to worry about, but it would be difficult to like develop a player and then just let another team take advantage of his best years, right? On top of that, like if this is the strategy you're pursuing, cap savings for what? What are you saving the cap for? You're not signing free agents if this is your strategy, unless it's quarterback, left tackle, and wide receiver. And you're just not going to have, you're not going to devote cap room to that, like that much cap room. I think that, first of all, you're just not going to have like that many draft picks, even in a situation where you trade a bunch of people, to be able to replace those players effectively. Like take a look at that 2017 Vikings defense, right? A lot of those players, aside from like Linval Joseph, who's on a second contract, but a lot of those players were either at the beginning of their second contract or still in their first contract, right? Really, really great defense, a lot of really great players. Obviously, you've got like Harrison Smith and you've got, Xavier Rhodes who just signed. But, you've got Eric Kendricks from the 2015 draft. He's still in the rookie contract. You've got, Anthony Barr from the first contract. You've got Danielle Hunter from the 2015 draft. Those players, you could have traded them, but what are the odds that the trade value that you get for Kendricks, which is probably a second round pick, which, that's where you drafted him. What are the odds you're going to get a Kendricks again? Pretty low. What are the odds you're going to get a Danielle Hunter again? You probably get him for a first round pick. What are the odds you get him for a first round pick? You'd be able to replace him. Still low, even with a first round pick. And so you're effectively, switching a certainty for a probability, which is true in all of these trades. But I think if you do it systematically for some of your best players, at the hope of avoiding the end of their second contract, you're really going to screw yourself. Because if it's one for one, you get a draft pick for a player and it's appropriately priced, like a second round, third round, whatever, you're just only going to get a probability that that player is going to hit. So I don't think so. You're missing out on the player's best years. And the thing about the NFL is that though a lot of the ways that we've talked about analytics and roster construction has been to generate marginal advantages and increase the EPA per dollar and stuff like that, like the things that kind of matter and the reason that free agency contracts get so high, the reason that there's basically an exponential type curve, it's an exponential curve in like player quality and contract size, is because those differences, the small differences between the first and the second and the third best player, are enormous. They're huge because like like there's a simplified version, and I think that Brian Burke at Advanced NFL Stats, now with ESPN, but in the blog post Advanced NFL Stats, called it the bricklayer versus gladiator problem. A bricklayer, if you get a guy that lays bricks at a certain speed, and then a guy shows up that you could potentially hire at that could do it at twice the speed, you pay them twice as much. You don't pay them, 4 times as much unless there are some other constraints. But in most situations, it's additive, right? You could just lay more bricks. Cool. A gladiator, all that matters is who wins the fight. And so if you're a little bit better, you get all of the prize. Like, if you're 10% better, you get 100% of the prize. And in football, because there's only 11 players on the field, it's the little bit better for all of the prize is more the situation, because you can't add more players to get more production. You can only put 11 on the field. And so having a slightly better player is going to cost you a lot more, because that's just the way the value calculation works out. It's obviously more complex than that. There's probabilities and stuff like that, but that's the idea. And that's why the market works out that way. Trying to maximize EPA from an additive standpoint would be like, trading your first round for every 6th and 7th round pick in the draft, right? The points add up. In fact, the points are, you could probably get a bunch of thirds, right? Like, it all adds up. If you trade your first round pick, right, for the same amount of points, it gets you all the 7ths, all the 6ths, maybe a bunch of 5ths and a third or something like that. That would be bad. You might, because the math of trading down, have increased the probability that the players that you've drafted will contribute more when you add it all together. Not all those players can see the field, right? If all of those players hit, you're trading some of them, but really, honestly, you're cutting a lot of them. And that's kind of the scenario that you're approaching with this kind of question. You want like good players, even if it's not an efficient move from EPA per dollar, right? Or if you have to worry about the end of their contract life. Because really, just think about second contracts are really just about the first 3 years. After that, everything is fake. So that's really what you're looking at. And most of those players produce in the first 3 years of their second contract.
Next question is going to be also for Arif's business owner / boss corner.
All right.
Next week, I will be going into the office for a 3-day all-department retreat. I've been told there will be an icebreaker of 2 truths and a lie. What's your strategy during this professional setting? And as a boss, would you appreciate one of your employees sharing 3 lies and saying 2 of them are true?
I don't have employees. I just want to make that clear. No employees. I don't have employees. If someone ever gets added on to like wide left or whatever, it depends on how difficult this is legally, but I just prefer a co-ownership over an employee. That sucks. I hate that idea. So first of all, there's that. Second, how's your boss going to know their lies? Wait, you going to tell them? Like, how does that work? I guess if the lies are like big enough, it's just like very obvious that all 3 are lies. But that sounds like a fun icebreaker too, right? It's like that tells you a lot about the person too.
Yeah, as it turns out.
They're a good hang. That's what it tells me.
Or they lied to get the job, yeah. Cool.
Either way, good information to have. But the strategy. So the thing with this is like your goal is not to win, even though instinctively you want to win. I get it. I honestly, it's just so easy to just use travel like as one of your truths and one of your lies. And then the third one can just be like, I met Alan Page. That one's boring. But you could you do whatever you want, right? For the other truth. Because I'm sure there's something interesting in your life happening, right?
Yeah.
So you could just be like, I traveled to Iceland, I traveled to Egypt, and I played defensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings. I think that's definitely true. And if that one's true, like that rules. But the travel, who knows, right? So that's the one I typically default to. But yeah, as a boss, it's just an icebreaker. I don't care.
Be like, well, 9 toes. I was born with 9 toes. I can't take the shoes off though, because HR
inappropriate in office environment. Yeah,
exactly. But 9 toes. Also, none of you are allowed to come to visit my home. Turn into that. Anya Taylor-Joy asks for a Reefs offensive corner. Are there any records about the highest scoring offense per scrimmage play? Also, what's the worst joke to tell at a work function?
Well, the work questions. You all have to realize, I don't like go to work. I don't like have an office. I haven't had an office ever. I mean, I guess its own coverage, technically, I did and I could if I wanted to, but also I would have to pay for parking. So I wasn't going to do that. So like, you know, I don't know. I don't have an office environment. Everything has been remote. The worst joke is to follow up the 9 toes thing with a foot fetish joke. I think that's probably, you're not in a good spot.
A series of foot puns is never a good idea, especially.
Don't go Wes Welker on the bit. Yeah.
Yeah, or don't go full James on the bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll end up needing a blind towel.
Yeah. As for points per scrimmage play, first of all, I just want to say I don't think that this metric matters all that much. I think it's really more of an explosiveness metric. I think points per drive tells you how good an offense is, because a lot of times your goal is to complete the half or complete the game with a long drive to drown out the clock, right? Your goal, like, if you score points any faster, that doesn't really usually help you outside of clock situations, because now they get an opportunity to score. So if you take a long time to score, it doesn't give them any more opportunities. So I don't really care about points per play, but I do have it up. So the NFL record for points per play belongs to the Kansas City Chiefs of 2018 with 0.567 points per play, followed by the 2011 Green Bay Packers, 0.567 points per play, also, but smaller, 567. Then the 2007 New England Patriots, 0.557 per play, so it's a whole 1/100th of a point per play lower. Then the 98 Vikings, 0.552 per play. And then this is weird, the 1950s Rams at 0.544 per play. And if you don't want to count that, it's the 2016 Falcons at 0.543 per play. So this doesn't actually include the 2013 Broncos, who are ranked 13th because they scored a ton of points and they played super fast and they had a lot of plays. They had a lot of plays per drive, but they scored a lot of points per drive, probably more than some of the teams that are ranked above them. So that's one reason that this is not super great as a measure, but it's kind of fun. It tells you how quickly people score, how explosive they tend to be. The Chiefs just did not run that many plays. Goodness.
Yeah. Next question is from A Second Jet Has Hit Drew Bledsoe.
Jeez, that's so good.
For a Reefs national coverage corner, the Bucs just named Baker as their starting quarterback. So is Kyle Trask that bad?
Yeah, honestly, yes. I don't think they would have tried that last season with Tom Brady. I know it's Tom Brady, but I don't think they would have tried that last season with Tom Brady if they thought Kyle Trask could take over, right? Jared Allen doesn't fly to Mississippi if Tavares Jackson's a good quarterback.
I mean, well, yeah, I'll tell you what, he may go down to Mississippi, but Brad Childress doesn't show up at the airport like a chauffeur.
Yeah, right.
In order to pick him up. That seems about right. Yeah. The Real Jack asks for a Reefs Magic the Gathering corner. Now we're officially off the rails here, folks. What color decks would you classify the offensive/defense as, respectively? Defense and the back in general seems to be red and black, super aggro, but I can't make heads or tails of the offense. It's been figuratively killing me.
I'm glad you added figuratively. That was really important. I would have been worried otherwise. So obviously this is about the nature of the Vikings specific units and not defense, offense in general, because in general, and I don't know anything about Magic the Gathering, I don't do nerd stuff, but I would say that offense in general is red-black because it's aggressive. Black does sneaky stuff like poison and it works with death and stuff like that. Red gets cards out into the field really quickly. It does direct damage to the opposing summoner. I don't know anything about Magic the Gathering, but in general, that would be what an offense is. But specifically with Brian Flores, given how aggressive It is. You could say that there is kind of a high risk, high reward, play fast. Red makes a lot of sense. I don't know as much about black. It might just be a monocolor deck. Um, but yeah, I think that that's probably it. I think probably Ed Donato was more of a green deck, very predictable, takes a long time to build up, does kind of very similar stuff over time. And it thought it was a white deck, maybe a green white deck, but it really wasn't. Um, as for the offense, I think it's probably blue or blue black. Blue black decks, again, I don't play Magic the Gathering, I don't know anything about it, are insanely annoying and play with a lot of misdirection, play with mechanics that you're not used to, have just different ways of altering the game that are kind of unusual. So it's probably blue black on offense and red, just red on defense. But yeah, I mean, like the offense is built off of misdirection, with like the play action stuff, the way the plays are sequenced together. You play with tempo a little bit more on this offense than you did in previous offenses. That kind of thing. It tends to, this one gets a little bit more unstructured, which has been actually good for Cousins, which I wouldn't have expected. And that kind of fits the blue-black aesthetic as well. So that's probably the direction I would go in. It's kind of a sneaky offense. It's kind of annoying. It kind of tries to play games with your eyes. But it's not as much as like the Kyle Shanahan offense. That's a more pure distillation of what that would look like.
Kyle Slaby asks, for a Reef's child rearing corner, my wife and I are talking baby names and I need your help. We would like to have a name that honors two of the greatest men we know, but we can't decide what sounds better. Does the name Luke Carson or Carson Luke sound better?
I don't know what it is about like Luke Musgrave or Carson Palmer that, I mean, if you know them, that's really cool. But yeah, I mean, Luke Musgrave, he hasn't done anything in the NFL yet, rookie tight end for the Packers. But, it seems like he's going to start for them. He's going to be kind of an interesting player. And obviously he's related to Bill Musgrave. And then Carson Palmer, I've heard he's a great guy. So I get it. I think Luke Carson sounds more like a country singer. And if that's your jam, fine. But I'd probably go with Carson Luke in that situation. Please do not clarify who these players are named after.
Yeah, let's not. Don from Ohio asks, Lewis Scene's up and down play is quite troublesome. It appears he plays at his best when he eats a cooked meal from Pit Boss Grills equipment. Really, Don?
Come on, man.
At what point should the Vikings go to all meals being cooked on wood pellet grills? It's a lock for a Super Bowl win.
Why should they change their catering strategy because of a backup?
Boy, that is a better answer than I was going to be able to come up with. Yeah, that. Also, hey guys, I helped photograph an authentic Hispanic wedding last weekend. And
that phrasing raises some red flags for me.
Yeah, we're going to move past that one. And the food was lights out. It was shipped in from Detroit, and the pork was slow cooked for 24 hours, melt in your mouth.
Sounds delicious. That's good.
When I asked the caterer about birria tacos, he said Americans and American restaurants ruined them. My question to you, how does it feel to ruin another cultural food dish?
Don, I honestly, thank you so much. It's been so long since I've been called an American.
It's refreshing, quite frankly.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah, no, I also get to engage in cultural imperialism. Me too. I am a part of this country just as much as you are. We will wash away and uniformize all of the cultural food traditions that you enjoy. And I'm a part of that. Also, I don't believe this interaction with the caterer happened, and birria tacos still slap.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite things to do when traveling is to find a place that doesn't have a single word of English on the menu. Whether it's like a physical written menu or if it's just the one with pictures above where you're ordering.
Right.
Yep. Just find yourself in that sort of situation. Just embrace it. Call it good. If you find birria, you found birria. But it's quite tasty. Let's go to Nolan Kaler, who asks, for North Code, as you are well aware, our Blue Bombers are on track for another deep push for the Grey Cup. However,
Such a fake country. I can't believe it, man.
we actually had an extended conversation on poutine again in the pre-show stuff. However,
This time I didn't initiate it. Let me be clear.
As a matter of fact, you didn't. However, in ways in which they've been winning this year, it feels a lot more tenuous. Have our brothers in Bud Grant taken on the Vikings' unsustainability?
Yeah, we don't believe in like magic or karma or kind of supernatural, extranatural type occurrences. But yeah, they've absorbed it and they've taken it on. I don't know anything about the Blue Bombers. But yes, 100%.
In a way that's much more truthful than you not knowing anything about Magic the Gathering.
Wait, sorry, what's that? Magic the what?
Exactly. E.T. Spaceman asks, has Arif spoken to Greg Joseph about starting a relationship advice site called Wife Left? Now, that started, the Greg Joseph wife thing started as a Thomason tweet, right? That was a Thomason tweet?
Yeah, it was a Thomason tweet. I was actually just about to say, like, I know there are a bunch of people that didn't like Chris Thomason, in the Vikings Twitter sphere, but yeah, I'm going to kind of miss him, man.
There were some pure gold moments. Yeah. And he had tweeted out, instead of that the kick was wide left, he had said that Greg Joseph's wife left.
Well, it was like the way the tweet was phrased was something like Greg Joseph lines up for a kick, misses, period, wife left, period. It was just like, oh, it just sounds like that's the reason he missed the kick.
Yeah, exactly. The way it was and like it stayed up for a long time.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. And then when somebody asked him about it, he didn't even blink. It's like, come on. Finally, Zen Cupid asks, for Arif's ex-Dakotan corner, as a brand new Minnesota resident from North Dakota, what are the top benefits I can expect from moving, and what are the drawbacks, if any? Is this the best possible decision I could have made in the entirety of my life?
The answer is yes. The benefits include cities with services and infrastructure and things nearby. Stuff to do, that's another one. I'd say having a higher degree of confidence in the cleanliness of your water, that's a big one. North Dakota actually has like a pretty good education funding for what I understand, or at least last time I looked into it, who knows. So, that's not going to be too dramatically different, but that is something that Minnesota is known for. But yeah, I don't know. Everything is just kind of better. I don't know how else to put it. It's better and more good.
More
drawbacks,
good, huh? That's
that's the education funding.
Oh, okay, good. Just wanted to check.
Yeah. Yep. The drawbacks, unfortunately in Minnesota, you can't go to a town that's been carved out by oil companies and then left to rot when they leave. So you don't get any of that. That really sucks.
Yeah, it's not oil, it's other companies instead. So
yeah.
Famously, actually.
Yes.
There's less towns owned by Nazis in Minnesota as well. So that's a thing.
Yeah. There's fewer Nazi-owned towns.
I did enjoy how that like news story slowly but surely crept out. It was like there's a town in North Dakota that like all the property just started getting bought up by a Nazi. Like, wait, this is a thing here?
Just do it. Yeah, you just do it.
Yep, that's North Dakota tough right there. No, that's
rough.
That's not how any of this works. That's terrible, and I apologize. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Reef, what do you have to plug?
So obviously Wide Left Post or my Wide Left Substack at wideleftpost.substack.com just released a really long article that one of the listeners mentioned in the mailbag about the way that artificial intelligence, or at least what we class as artificial intelligence in the way that we talk about it, interacts with sports writing and what the impact of that is going to be on sports consumers. And so if you want to read that, a good chunk of it's, not behind a paywall, but the majority of it is, head over to wideleftpost.substack.com and either sign up for like a 7-day free trial. Take a look at, I've only been publishing for about a week, so there's not like a ton of stuff, but take a look at the kind of stuff that I write. Or just sign up right away. That'd be fantastic. If you have been subscribed to the Patreon as of August 15th, and it was like, we have your email. You've been comped a month subscription. So be sure to take advantage of that if you have it. And open the emails. I've got a really high email open rate. Don't know what that's about. That rules. I'm glad you're opening the emails from the Substack. But yeah, check it out. That's like my most recent piece. I've also got a piece breaking down the big nickel, which is the nickel with the safety formation, why you do that. I've got some recaps. Every Friday, I'll post a recap of everything I've written around the web because I still do freelance stuff. I still make podcast appearances and stuff. And then also stuff that I read this week that I liked that I'll share with the rest of you. And that's always free. So head over to wildleftpost.substack.com.
And that's going to be it for this episode. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that you should probably just put that in the garage next time. And we'll be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.